Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to But Why the Reviews. And today we are talking about a preview. We're talking about Dragon Age, the Veilguard. As always, I'm your host, Kate. And today I'm here with Eric.
Hi, hello. We were definitely talking about normal things before this started. Don't worry. Completely normal stuff.
Oh, yes, entirely normal. Eric, why don't you tell the people who are about to listen to you talk for however many minutes we record this, where you're from and what you do?
Hi, I'm Eric Van Allen. By day, you can find me over at destructoid.com as the senior editor over there, heading up a lot of different projects. You're probably going to see me talking a lot about the game we're talking about today once we get towards the embargo dates for various stuff. And then by night, you can find me over at Axe of the Blood God, an independent RPG podcast I co-host with Kat Bailey and Nadia Oxford. And also at Normandy FM, a retrospective podcast where we cover a lot of different games with Kenneth Shepard. We do cover a lot of different stuff, but we started as a Bioware podcast. And so obviously we'll have some Veilguard stuff there too. So you can find a lot of our thoughts over there. I'm really just talking a lot about Veilguard over the next week or so. It's kind of amazing, but also like this is not to get too ahead of the gun here, but like Bioware is kind of one of the more major parts of me professionally in this industry. So I guess it's kind of fitting.
And honestly, like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you because I think one of the first times we were like really started, I guess, vibing more than just like randomly seeing each other on the internet was for a Mass Effect podcast, or not
Hmm.
podcast panel that was
Yep.
also a podcast. So I think that
Hmm.
this is very, very fitting. So to kick things off, the quick synopsis is that you play Rook in another standalone Dragon Age game. Dragon Age: The Veilguard specifically takes place 9 years after the last one, and on top of that, you are trying to stop two elven gods who have been released by a ritual that Solus has done that you messed up. So here we are. You're going to fight big monsters. You're going to fight the Blight, and you're
Mhm.
going to explore more of Thetis. Eric, what were your expectations for the Veilguard? Which I will say, for those listening who don't know, this has been about a 10-year development cycle for this game.
Yeah, that's a really good jumping off point because I feel like, we had the initial reveal that something was new was coming after Inquisition. I mean, even like Trespasser, the DLC that came out for Inquisition, really set up like this idea that we were going into a larger arc, a grander narrative. Dragon Age has always been very high fantasy, both in its theming, but also in the way it presents its story. So you have these ideas of like anthology stories within the larger world of Thetis. Fun fact that everyone loves to tell you, you know how when you watch Lord of the Rings and they're like, did you know that Aragorn broke his toes in that scene? Everyone who plays too much Dragon Age will tell you, did you know that Thetis is just the Dragon Age setting? Fun little factoid for those listening. But they were kind of these anthological works that would be somewhat linked, and BioWare did develop a habit of kind of teasing out those ideas between games, but it was not so linked as to be compared to like Mass Effect and the Shepard trilogy, as you might call it. Uh, and that was always kind of interesting because it did harken back to BioWare's roots in Baldur's Gate and the D&D world and things like that. But I think there were two generations of gamers that grew up with BioWare, right? There were those who grew up with Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 and loved the BioWare of yore. And then you had those who latched on with the 360 era, especially with Mass Effect, and even earlier than that with KOTOR and things like that. And it was a different era of BioWare.
Jade Empire
So-
deserves
Oh,
a
Jade
shout out.
Empire. Jade Empire, I could, I already did one podcast all about it, but what a complicated game to unpack in the modern
Yep.
day, let me tell you. But I give you all this preamble because once we got to 2014, 2015, Trespasser is out, Dragon Age, the new one is in development, and then BioWare goes through a wild period of just Mass Effect Andromeda does not live up to expectations. Anthem, catastrophically fails, I would say. It was a
Yeah.
big flounder. You have BioWare kind of living under the thumb of EA and what EA wants for it. And also, like Dragon Age is just constantly there are reports coming out from folks like Jason Schreier about the development of Dragon Age, going through troubled times, different people leaving the company, different writers leaving the company. At one point, I believe the reports were that it was going to be multiplayer centric, and then it wasn't multiplayer centric anymore. So my expectations going in, and also we have not seen much of Dragon Age the Veilguard leading up to this point, to the point that we had Dragon Age, whatever we wanted to call it, Dragon Age 4, and then Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and now Dragon Age Veilguard. I wanted to see if this was a freaking video game. I wanted to know if there was a .exe that I could double click on a desktop to boot up and play a video game called Dragon Age. And I mean it lived up to that at the very least, but
It
it's
is in fact a game.
it is an executable that you can run on a modern home system. And I think that's the first thing I wanted to know was just like, what is this game now after
Yeah.
years, after a decade of development, like we said, and after all these trials and tribulations, and also Dragon Age being this game that was kind of caught between two different eras of Bioware to begin with. What does that turn into? And now we've got a new
Yeah.
creative team on board. We've got a lot of new faces alongside some old faces. What does this turn into? And so that was my second expectation, or I guess what I was looking forward to seeing was what does this team do with it? What does
Mhm.
BioWare look like nowadays?
Yeah. I
What
think for
about you?
me, like it was one of those where like I have started to realize because I've polled a lot of my friends who are couples and also who game. Every couple has a Mass Effect player and a Dragon Age player. I
Mm,
was the Mass Effect. I am the Mass Effect player of my relationship, and it doesn't mean that I never like I did try to play Dragon Age and. I've played it here and there. I've watched a lot of like like the cinematic like things on YouTube where you can watch like through an entire relationship because that's the type of person I am. But because of, if you want me to be entirely honest, my very deep love of Tolkien, I take my fantasy games kind of loosely. I don't always play them through. I'm a little testy when it comes to it. And I think very
mhm,
specifically with Dragon Age, it was the idea of the anthology that didn't pull me in as much as something where Mass Effect, where I had one character and I followed with them throughout everything. That being said, we did get to see a hands-off preview at Summer Game Fest, and I left there feeling that it was the most beautiful game of the show. It
mm,
was it
mhm,
was gorgeous in just about every single way, but my expectation was that there was going to be too much thought in beauty and aesthetic and not as much on gameplay.
mhm,
And so watching the combat, specifically the pause and play system that they have with the ability wheel, it looked kind of clunky watching it. It looked really slow. It looked like you weren't really sure if you wanted if it was like this hybrid between a strategy and not a strategy, and it didn't read well when I was just watching that presentation. And so coming into it, I just kind of I wanted to know more, and I think that that's what I left that preview feeling at SGF at Summer Game Fest was just like I actually want to play it. Like
mhm,
I want to make my rook. I want to play through it. I want to put my hands on it because I don't know how I feel right now. But it was gorgeous,
mhm.
which brings us to talking about how we think they executed it when we got to play. Because we played it for what, 6 hours?
Yeah, once we double click the .exe, how did it happen?
Yes.
We did not double click a .exe, by the way. That was already set up for us.
They already had it boot up.
Um, they did, I just gotta say, if there there are some Bioware folks listening, and hi, hello. The webcams that they had for our capture were turned on by default, and so there's a silly amount of me playing this game, and like all this beautiful stuff is happening on screen, and I'm just sitting there like schlubbed over, like, yeah. Yeah, this good video game. In like total like gamer stance. So
I
that
also
was
didn't
great.
realize how wild I look when I'm trying to drink and still keep my mask somewhat in my face and not because I'm too lazy to take it all the way off. I found that out by looking at the cameras.
I'm so glad I didn't eat while I was playing. I made the conscious decision because I was too afraid of getting food in the keyboards, and I don't want to be that person who like got ants in the Bioware keyboards. And I was glad I didn't end up with that accidental mukbang, that would have been
Oh
bad.
God.
But yeah, so talking about the actual video game that we're here to talk about, Dragon Age the Veilguard is a Dragon Age game. It is, I think that was my main takeaway. Again, I was talking about how I just wanted to see if it was a real video game. I was surprised by how much of a BioWare game it felt like, and how
Yeah.
much of a like older Bioware game, not that old. Like I think the comparison point I kept coming back to for me personally was Dragon Age 2.
Hmm.
That in a lot of ways it feels like a successor to the ideas of Dragon Age 2. It has a lot of the same thoughts about how to use the conversation wheel, for example. Having that sort of like, oh, like staunch stoic answer, angry answer, cheeky answer. Like that's like having that sort of stuff, which I really like. I always like that system.
Yes.
I think a lot of the stuff around how you move through that space. So like we talked about your rook. I will say the introduction to Rook that we got was a little jarring. It was a little like, hey, you're Rook. Here is this character that you are playing as. They're really cool. They did some cool stuff. Varric's going to tell you about some of it, and then you're just going to be playing as them. Don't worry about it. And that can work in the right scenarios. I think like Commander Shepard in Mass Effect 1 was a great
Yeah.
example of here's this character where we're going to give you like a very quick introduction to who they are and what they did, and you get to like make some choices about what that means. But then you're kind of like in the thick of it. And I think Dragon Age Veilguard tries to do something similar. I just don't know that it super worked for me, or maybe like it was just that the gears were showing just a little bit more than I would have normally wanted them to, but it
Mm,
also that faded pretty fast. I think as time has gone on, that has bothered me less than it did when I first played it. So
yeah.
that might have just been an initial impressions thing where I was being like very analytical of this thing. And that was the first thing we saw was the introduction to the game.
Yeah.
So um but broadly, the sense that like you're Rook, you're kind of leading this small, intrepid band of the Veilguard who are trying to deal with the issue that oopsie, we let the gods out um, while living in Solus's old house. Uh, I kind of like the flow of it. I like that there's a very level based, not quite mission based, but definitely like you are moving between areas.
Yeah.
You kind of have what one of the developers described to me as like a hub and spoke design, which is kind of stuck in my head since then. Of you are going to these different zones. You kind of have this overworld thing that's like the crossroads, which kind of opens up as you play more of the game, and you can do more stuff in there. But then that takes you out to okay, this is how you get to Minrathous, this is how you get to Treviso, this is how you get to some of the areas in this game. And then in those areas, there are also missions that you will undertake that will take you to even more bespoke places and in specific like designed levels and dungeons and things like that. And then the things you're doing there, it's very action heavy. I think compared
Yes.
to other Dragon Age games, it's definitely more active than Origins. I'd say even more active than Dragon Age Inquisition to some degree, to a bit of a fault. And this is maybe where like my actual thoughts about Dragon Age, the Veilguards start to form. And I can bounce it
Hmm.
to you for this in a second, but like it's a very you control Rook and you can tell your teammates what to do. But as far as I could tell, there was not a way for your teammates to go down or lose health or die. Uh, and your teammates just kind of did stuff otherwise, but they're really there to kind of do setups for combos or detonations of combos and stuff like that. Uh, it felt a little bit more compact in that way. I wasn't doing the
Hmm.
sort of thing in Inquisition where I was like pulling the camera out, being like, okay, well, I'm gonna stand back here and cast my spell as a mage while the warrior moves up here. Instead, it was much more of like it felt much more actiony and like you were
Yeah.
doing things in the moment, which worked in some cases. Playing rogue felt great. Whereas I didn't like playing mage personally, because I just felt like I was doing things that I don't want to do as a mage, and I also
Yeah.
did not fully grapple with the mage. So I'm curious how you felt about this stuff. And we would just went over a lot of it, but maybe like what your
Yeah.
first blush of
I
Dragon Age Veilguard was.
so like genuinely, I love this game
Hmm.
and what I played because of how actiony it was.
Mm,
Because I really dug the combat. And I think that there was like this nice balance for me where like I don't disagree. Like the action is very compact and I'm not having to stop and think about everybody else on the board, which I think can be a detriment if that's the type of game that you're kind of looking for, especially in like a post Baldur's Gate era, right? Like that is something that it's gonna have to deal with. But for me as a player who gets impatient and wants to like barrel through and also really focus on where I'm moving, I feel like that made more sense to me because the combat to me which was the thing I was most hard on. Like, I think that was my main critique coming out of Summer Game Fest in the preview that I wrote. I thought it was going to be slow, and I played Sword and Board, which traditionally I do not play in any sort of action game because it's usually really stumbly, usually really slow. I'm a paladin in 14, and that's
Hmm.
about it. Usually I'll go rogue or something like that. But I did it, and everything felt quick and dynamic without feeling like it was weightless, which I think is the important thing when you're using heavy weapons. You have to feel some of the impact and recoil and time to like get back to doing what you were doing. At the same time, I never felt interrupted by it. And I think that a lot of the pause and play helped me with that in some ways. And I think working as a sword and board and knowing when to use my shield, I was kind of critical about the automatic trajectory lines that you get from ranged enemies.
Hmm.
So you can kind of see like a little line that shows you where it's going to go. It changes a color once it's fired. And I was like, I don't need training wheels. Like, this is annoying. What are we doing? But then the longer that I did it, the more that I realized it let me use my weapons to a better ability. And if you were in a situation where there were a lot of range and all of a sudden you saw like a sea of white lines heading towards you, it actually upped the tension for me. And so it was one of those where, like, I felt like the combat didn't suffer for the larger narrative cinematic elements, which I think sometimes right now in a lot of games that we're getting, it's usually either really good combat, really bad story, really bad story, really good combat. And I think that like finding the balance between those two seamlessly, like I actually think the intro worked for me because it was actually really cool to see the way that it transitioned from cinematic to gameplay. It's probably one of the most seamless transitions, not tonally, I will agree there, but visually. And I think that that kind of was done, if I were to take my guess, to show off immediately the advancements that they've made in that visual fidelity with the
Oh
game.
yeah, and the visual
And
fidelity enhancements are so good. Like the
I,
art
I'm
direction design in this
astounded.
game. Yeah. I think the most striking visual for me was in that beginning where you're in Minrathous and you have that giant panopticon Templar tower
Yeah.
hovering overhead that's just shining the spotlights down. And we've seen that in SGF and all that. Like that's been shown before, but it really did strike me as this way to introduce you to the North, which is like a big thing for Dragon Age fans. We've kind of been in the South for a long time. Ferelden, Orlais, Kirkwall is kind of like in the middle there, but getting to actually move forward and move north onto the to Winter Imperium and some of those areas, getting to see this stuff is really really cool. Antiva looks super just lush and gorgeous. I think my favorite section that we played though was the ossuary with where you recruit
Oh, yes.
Lucanus
Yeah.
and uh this amazing section that really just felt like BioWare going, we're going to show off a little bit. And so
Hmm.
going into this, I was curious because I had heard the rumblings that this wasn't going to be an open world type thing. This wasn't
Yeah.
going to be like Dragon Age Inquisition where you have the hinterlands and you're kind of running all around and picking up stuff and playing very open world, that it was more like open zone, a little bit more mission level based type stuff, areas that you could go back to and maybe retread a little bit, but they would change and things like that.
Hmm.
And that is largely what panned out. It was not a super open world in that sense. There wasn't really any place that looked like the hinterlands or anything. But what it did mean was that I like Inquisition, but I would say that one of its larger faults is it doesn't have a ton of recognizable areas outside of like some of the zones you do dungeons in. In oh, I forgot the name of it. It's a really good mission. In Hearts of Flame or something like that. Is one of my favorite parts of Inquisition because it's where you learn a lot of like backstory about the world and about the characters, and it's this very like contained area. And the ossuary felt like that, where it was like we have this
Yeah.
area that is built that feels made for what you are doing here, and to introduce this character and these ideas and this faction. You're dealing with, I believe, the Venatori,
Yeah.
and just a lot of like it's this underwater dungeon that's like you're in like an air bubble basically, and it's gorgeous to look at. I love a lot of that stuff. I think it is Bioware flexing a little bit and showing like, hey, we're not there. There was maybe some worries that we were going to get like the scraps of a multiplayer
Yeah.
game, and they're very much like, no, no, we're doing like an RPG. We're doing
Yeah.
the sort of adventure that does feel very akin to a Dragon Age 2 or even a Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 was the other one I heard compared to a lot in the
I
game.
kept thinking about Mass Effect 2
Yeah.
consistently.
That sense of like you're picking up these companions, you're kind of recruiting them gradually. You're going out, you're doing missions for them. We got to play one of the later companion missions
Yeah.
for that character, and also see like different parts of the world. Like Omega might be a really good comparison for how this hub and spoke design works, where you're on the Normandy, which is kind of like your home base, your campfire. You land at Omega, and then Omega is kind of this large place that has all this stuff going on. But then when you want to go on an actual mission in Omega, you go to like the dock or something. And it's like, okay, this is where we send you into the actual mission area. And a
Mhm.
lot of a lot of the Veilguard really feels designed that way, and it does like rekindle those feelings. When I say it feels like a Bioware game, that's what I'm talking about. Like that's those moments. I'm
It
curious on your
was
end. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things for me where, like, I know I talked about a lot about the combat, and I think it's because I came in with such low expectations, but I don't think I had that type of immediate like connection or wanting to know more about characters that were in there as companions. I think that like I haven't had that since Mass Effect
Hmm.
personally. I because I think that there's a certain way in which BioWare is very good at dropping you into these lives of people or elves or Canary or dwarves
Hmm.
when you meet them. And there's a weight of a history that they have. And we didn't, there was one character that we met Lucanus
Hmm.
and we met Balara.
Hmm.
And those two we kind of spent the most time with, a Neve or Nev, I forget what
Nev.
it's
Yeah.
Nev, yeah, Nev. And then everybody else was kind of like we did get to play through all the companions, but kind of in a lesser capacity. But those three we were able to talk more with. At least if I spent an hour in character creator after we were advised to only spend 30 minutes.
You really
So
did. You really, really did. Yeah.
I was behind the class when it came to progressing. That said, what I was hit with was an immediate, like, genuine kinship to Lucanus.
Hmm.
We don't know much out of the small bits that we were shown. And what hit me was that they did it, like, my brain was just like, they did it again. Like, I felt a connection to him in the way I did my favorite companions from Mass Effect. And I think that the empathy building in a video game is something that I think is a much taller task than empathy building in, say, a movie, because you have to be with that character so much longer and you have to build it and it has to be able to sustain hours and hours and hours of time together, and you
Hmm.
have to want to keep going back and investing in it. And I think that when BioWare is at its best, that's what it's doing. And obviously it was just a preview, but that's what I took away, which is why I made the comments about like really good narrative and like story on top of really good combat for me. And that's what kind of blew me away. I do think overall, like, I would buy the art book for this game immediately if it went up
Hmm.
right now
Hmm.
because of how beautiful the environments are. The ossuary is by far the most beautiful. I love Minthrasis, and actually I love Treviso the most.
Treviso's great.
Um,
It's really
Treviso is my
amazing.
favorite, even though it's like Italian, but everybody has Spanish accents, and that's kind of weird for my brain. But everybody's really cool.
Just everybody says Treviso.
Yeah. Um, and so I think like when I'm trying to form my thoughts about Dragon Age, I think most of the time, or the Veilguard, most of the time I was very focused on the combat on the character creator. And now that I'm actually taking time to talk about the companions, I think that it's a standout. And I think that that is what makes a game last isn't necessarily the discourse or dialogue that you have with other people outside of it, but it's the emotional connections that you build with it. And then to do
So
that
much.
in an RPG, it's reliant on the companions.
I I think back, I've had this conversation a few times on Axe of the Blood God because we talk about how like the idea of fandom has become, I mean, it's always been popular. You know, it's ever since Star Trek, right? Like ever
Hmm.
since like Kirk and Spock and all that. Like that's been a thing. But like I do feel a lot of recent games, you look at stuff like Fire Emblem Three Houses had a very compelling cast that people latched onto, made a lot of
Hmm.
memes and wrote stuff about them, like fan fiction stuff. FF7 infamous for the amount of fan fiction that it spawned, but now you have modern games, uh like say your Baldur's Gate 3, where like the cast really takes on a life of its own, and I
Yep.
think like that is a hallmark of Bioware at its best. Like Mass
Yeah.
Effect, the Mass Effect cast, like especially the like core Mass Effect crew that you get in one and kind of carries through, but even characters in two and three end up being these like standout characters that live outside of just the game that they are in.
Well,
Become
Morden was the first time I wept at a
hmm
video
hmm
game. Like genuinely.
And so I think that was the other thing is I was looking at this list of characters, and I definitely love the lineup that's here.
Yeah.
Like I think some early standouts for me were definitely we got so much time with Lucanus that it feels kind of cheap to say like he was the winner by far, but he was the winner by
He's
far.
also
Like
the hottest. I'm
he when he
sorry.
showed up and he's got like the big wings and he's doing all the stabby, and already everybody like is swooning in the room,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's also like got a demon in him, and like, oh, okay, so now it's just like locked, it's secured, this is the one that
I
people are
can
going to go
fix him. I
feral
can fix
for.
him. And he's hot. And he has big purple
Yes.
wing. Like,
Yes. People are going to go feral for this man. And I love that. I think Davrin, we barely got time with him, but in the short time I had with Davrin, I did really like his character, his
mhm,
banter, the stuff we had around his life as a Grey Warden was really cool. Lace Harding, fan favorite character from Inquisition, now a
yeah.
fully fledged party member, seems to have some very interesting lore stuff going on. I think in terms of, everybody was obviously talking about who you gonna romance, who's your character. I think Nev was that character for me, but only because that was the character that I felt I had the most time to actually
Yeah.
talk to in the game. I'm curious to see how that pans out over the course of the game, but I did like her
She did
story.
have the best plain clothes. Like, she had the best plain clothes
she
outfit.
she just had unbuttoned, rocking, blasting chest in the middle of a business meeting, like sitting there, like
Yes.
we're talking about world-ending conflict, and she's like, "Yes, this is important to talk about." And I'm like, "So nobody else is gonna say anything?" Okay, okay. And I'm like, "All right." Um, Balara, I think I gotta learn more about. I just feel like I only got a little bit of her character, but I think the recurring thing was if you've played Andromeda, she has like PB energy from that game.
Yeah, that's why I
Uh,
liked her so much.
yeah, that can be really hit or miss for me, so that's
Oh, it can
part of
be hit
why.
or miss for anybody. Like, that
Yeah.
is like, there's a fine line between adorable and grating.
Yes. In the same way, I'm curious to see how Emmerich pans out because
Hmm.
he keeps making me think of that guy from the Venture Brothers, the like the magician and all that. And I like every
I
time I see
hate
him, I
that.
think of that dude.
I hate that you say that because I see him and I immediately love him because he reminds me of Vincent Price.
Oh
And then
yeah,
you
yeah.
said that at the
Which that
event, and I
that
was like,
character is
oh,
lampooning Vincent Price, so like
I
that
know, but
totally
like,
clicks.
I don't want to think about parody, and now I have to. But you're not wrong.
Um,
You are solidly not wrong.
Tosh is also someone who I think is going to probably be a fan favorite. We just need to see more of her. We barely got to see any of her.
Yeah, Tosh, I want to know more about because like she gives me big Wooklamat vibes in like the
Mhm.
way that I really like, where like big, dumb, cute, that's what matters.
Uh,
And a lot of her lines, because I ran something with her and Lucanus, their conversational lines as you're walking through areas are really good.
one thing that I am curious about it is because like I do love, big muscle woman. It's a big thing in RPGs right now. Obviously, Karlach is like the standard bearer for that. But one thing I really liked about Dragon Age Inquisition, and even Dragon Age 2, was the Qunari, who kind of like when they first show up, you think, okay, they're the big brutes. They're muscly and they're powerful and they hit stuff, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, these are gonna be like the himbos, right? Like they're just gonna be like nothing going on up here, but they can punch things. And Iron Bull in Inquisition ends up being the most like strategic, like he's thinking 15 steps ahead. He's actually like a covert guy who's working and playing in politics and stuff like that. And he's been hiding it from everybody because he's like, oh, everybody thinks I'm just like the mercenary warband leader. And I love that about Iron Bull. Like he's such an interesting character because of that. I'm curious, like, if there is that sort of twist with Tosh. It's not that she suddenly needs to be like, oh, I can actually, like, I'm super intelligent, hyper smart, but just like, I want to see what the depth is there beyond, like, we
Yeah.
have the big muscle woman who lifts weights and stuff like that. And I think some of the stuff that they're hinting at with her, she's got like some attire that hints towards the Lords of Fortune, who are kind of like one of the
Mm-hmm.
factions within the Dragon Age universe that likes to, go adventure seeking, thrill seeking. I would like to see how that plays out, how that affects her personality. If she's kind of like
Yeah.
a maybe an Indiana Jones type character or stuff like that, or even a Laura Croft, which I think would fit very well.
Yeah.
But I do like this band, this crew. I think the scene we had where they were kind of all gathered around the war table, and there's not really like a war table again in the way that Inquisition works. You're not like assigning resources or anything, but you do kind of have this area where everybody gathers and
Mm-hmm.
will like talk about, okay, what do we do next? What's coming up? It felt like the Mass Effect 2, the conference
Yeah.
room that you had where everybody would talk about the next mission and all that. So God, the Mass Effect 2 DNA is so strong in this
It's
game.
really strong. No, like I think in my preview, I wrote that it feels like a game that's been in development for 10 years, but I mean that in an extremely complimentary way. I feel like having to rebuild itself multiple times
Mhm.
from what we know. And I'm sure more beyond that that wasn't shared with the public. I feel like the developers had to really choose what was essential to the Bioware DNA in and of itself. And they had to whittle it down to then build it up again each time. And I think that that has really, at least in what we've seen, which was 6 hours, and apparently was just Act One, like
Yeah, there
just
there
Act
was
One.
I don't know what that was about. I don't want to like fully confirm that or anything. Like don't,
It
but
was,
there were some people saying that that was a lot of what we saw was like fairly early in the game. Which some of the things we saw, I was like, feel like I'm seeing some pretty big stuff here. So,
yeah. But
yeah.
I am excited for that possibility very specifically because I do think that like that is what's going to be the make or break for this game because I do think it has a lot going up against it.
Mm,
And it feels like they made that with that in mind. In a very positive way, almost like a if we are going to have to keep rebuilding ourselves and everybody knows that we have been doing this, we have to make sure that that final thing that we're making is going to capture who we are as a studio, capture the legacy that we have, not just in Dragon Age, also in like the rest of the games. And I think that that is the really key piece that has helped it get to where it is. And I do think we saw a couple of or one of the really big choices you make, and I think that that and the impact that comes for it is what's going to really drive people investing time. But we also saw a lot of the little moments. I mean, I flirted with Lucanus when I could,
mhm.
and that was great. I also flirted with Harding. That was also great. But they're like these little like vulnerability moments that you get with characters that I think is showing like the long haul push that they're going to have.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up that like that's another very BioWare thing that it felt good to see was that I had to double check my embargo just now to be like, okay, what can I say? And like, um, the way I'll put it is that you can make world changing choices. You can choose a
Yes.
thing that will change the state of the world. BioWare cops do not come to my house.
Yes.
But like,
Which
I,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that is like you think a lot about the choices that you make in a BioWare game,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are very I think have ranged across the board. A lot of them can end up being very personal, and I'm interested to see if
Mhm.
those are similarly reflected here. Especially again, Mass Effect 2. That's a game where you're basically like, as we talked about in Normandy FM, like you're about to go on a suicide mission, and a lot of your companion missions are about like tying off loose ends before they potentially like perish in this mission. And so a lot of them end up being like, how are you going to find your peace? And how are you going to settle your affairs and be ready to move on with life if you have to. And I haven't quite sussed out what the theme is here for Veilguard, but I do feel like it's dealing a lot with some really interesting and heady issues that could lead to some pretty impactful choices
Mhm.
around characters' identities, who they feel they are, what they feel defines them, and whether that comes from where they come from and who they were born into or what they can become. And I
Yeah.
think that was maybe, especially in some of the stuff we played for the companion stuff, I was feeling a lot of that. uh I'm interested to see if that actually turns out to be true, if it was just like our framing for that is what it is. But I think,
Yeah.
we've got the big, you make a choice and something massive changes. And I can't go too into detail other than to say like it does have a like very tangible feel to it. Like this is
Yeah.
not like you choose something and then it's like in the background like this thing has changed. It's like how, but what does that mean for me like in the game? No, you're going to feel the effect. You're going to be around the effect. And I like that. I think that's really cool and I'm excited for players to get into that.
Yeah, and I think that that's really where I think what also shined here was that player agency component, even
Mhm.
down to like the combat and like specking the trees. I think my one thing that I wish they had for sword and board or two hand specifically, you can choose Reaper or I forgot the name of the other one, which is the two-handed like heavy weapon. And then if you go sword and board, you can be a champion, but there isn't a second skill for you to roll into. You can just be
Oh,
champion. And that was like not as much as I wanted, but I do think like the depth of the skill trees and like that was something that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like this seems more in depth than any of the past BioWare games. And I think that that's something that I'm very interested in.
I will say that like I think it's an interesting evolution of what they've done in the past.
Mhm.
Because like Dragon Age 1 or Origins was very much like, here's a list of spells. What spells do you want to learn? And it was very like flexible, but it was a little dry. It,
Mhm.
your identity was basically like what you end up spending your points in. So you could become like a frost mage or a necromancer, but it was just because you put the points into it. It didn't feel, I think, as super reflected in your gameplay, more like you were
Yeah.
just kind of choosing what you wanted your big buttons to be. Uh and then as time went on, like Dragon Age 2, I think was just kind of a hack and slash. Like I do like that game, but it was like I always play rogue in it, and it's just like I'm gonna pull out my dual daggers and go nuts, and that's like the whole game to me. And then Inquisition did have a lot of like definition around what you want your characters to be, but I do feel like Veilguard is giving you a lot of identity in again very
Mhm.
tangible ways. I think the most obvious way is that you have the ultimate bar. You have this
Yep.
sort of thing where you can hit a button and do a super big attack, and you also have like finishers that I got a few, like there were definitely some canned finishers that repeat, but they're not like
They
obtrusive,
still
is what I'll
I,
say.
I I thought they still felt
Like
good.
they're still sick, like they're still cool, like I don't get sad, and also like procking them is really fun. Like that's
Yeah.
the actual fun part to me, is building that stagger bar and then getting the sick attack. Like the finishers being all like, I don't need like 20 different finishers, I just want the actual act of
Well,
doing a finisher to feel good.
and that was what I liked the most because I think a lot of my finishers, that stagger bar had been stacked by my companion. So I would just come in and ooh, I can press
Yeah.
this and a finisher will happen. And that felt really good because it kind of like, it made me feel more connected to them in the fight, which felt better outside of just the ability bar and matching what would complement each other for like a good synergy to do more
Hmm.
damage. That felt really nice. I will say on the player agency part, I do think that there's a very expansive character creator. I think that it has limits. I don't think it's
Hmm.
perfect by any means, especially when it comes to bodies. But I do think I have never, like, I want to know who came up with the idea to solve all of the people who sit in character creator for an hour, just rotating between three faces, to just say, you can pick those three faces and then
Mhm.
adjust your slider to take different components of it and then finesse them in like another menu. That for me, I think it was one of those I did not know I need this, but I really did. Because that like that back and forth between facial choices. I don't know how long you often spend in character creator on your own time. I spend a lot. So that was something that was really cool to see done.
I I do like the character creator. I think we both had our own critiques of it. Like you mentioned, I think body shape is one that's important to point out that like having a diversity of body shapes was not really there. And having that sort of stuff. For me, I was playing a Canary, and I like Canary characters a lot. I think the Canary are a really interesting faction in the world of Dragon Age, and I also figured like everybody else is gonna make an elf or a human. So
Yeah,
I'm and
not wrong.
I was legitimately curious because there was a lot of discussion going into the event of like Canary and how they looked in the game.
Hmm.
Um, I do think that a lot of the presets and even like some of the presets we were shown for the Canary characters didn't look like what I would want a Canary character to look like. I think of like again the Era Shock from Dragon Age 2 is like very um like visually distinct. This like rugged warrior who has like hardened lines and stuff like that. And so I was able to get somewhere close to that with my character and create something that felt like that rugged warrior, that Iron Bull, that Era Shock that I wanted. I do think you have to work for it a little bit, because you can often end up with either someone that looks just a little bit off, like people have been saying like the Canary just look a little too human, like you're a human that has like Canary horns put on them,
Hmm.
or you end up looking like handsome Squidward, and that's you never want that. And so I uh I did find that with enough tuning and stuff I could get there, and there are definitely the sliders there, so I do think you can make a good Canary. You just gotta like work at it a little bit and like
Yeah.
really I mean that was the thing in Inquisition too, I think, was that like that was a harder one to design for because they are
Yeah.
so visually distinct from the other races. The other three races are a little bit more human-like in their
Yes.
appearance, and I think that was notable when you add horns into the mix. It gets a
Well, and
little,
also like
speaking
they
as an
didn't
Al Ra
just
player in 14, when you add horns, it gets a little weird.
so like this is the thing that I think is very interesting about the Kunari is like the Aura, like it's just horns onto the side, but like at least your face maintains its still like pretty
Yes.
human structure. I'm fascinated by the way that they've built Kunari horns out from the front back that I
Mhm.
think changes the plane of the face in a way
It
that I
does.
can easily see how that takes a very long time to finesse and get where you need. Um,
The thing about the forehead, it like
yeah,
extends the forehead
an
higher
eight
in a
head.
way. Yeah, yeah, you get a real eight pack of a head up there. And that's the thing is like in other games, like Sten, I think is a bit of an outlier in Origins because he doesn't look super like later Canary do. But then you have the Arashok and the Iron Bull as like two major characters from the Canary that do have like very distinct
Hmm.
visuals. There are a lot of horn options. Shout outs to that. Love that. A lot of good ones to work with. I just think you're gonna have to spend some time like really
Yeah.
tinkering to like get to where you want to get. But I do think, personally speaking, that you can get somewhere where you will have a character that you vibe with.
Yeah.
You just gotta pay the Canary tax, I guess.
Yeah. I think I think one of the things that I really liked, and I don't know if people who don't use makeup would notice this, but so you had like your, I think it's like maybe 12 preset skin tones, and then you can move them between cool, neutral, and warm. And the reason that's really cool is that that is how foundations are done, and they are very different colors. So like in the winter, I'm like a 33 neutral interior tier, and then like in the summer, I'm a 33 W warm, because of the undertone of my skin in the
Mhm.
sun becoming more prominent. And that is something that I think is really interesting. I still wish there was a little bit more depth and distinction in the browns.
Mhm.
And the melanin pigmentation did like that slider didn't do much at all. It was just kind of there, like a hey, look, we did it. But the doing cool, warm, and neutral undertones is so smart from a lighting perspective and a rigging perspective as like a character artist, but it's also incredibly smart on how to use a limited palette effectively.
Mhm.
And so that was something I really liked. The hair technology, also phenomenal. We know that the FIFA or the sorry, EA Sports FC team
Mhm.
and the Madden teams did help them with skin color and hair texture in those pieces. But I think the technology that I think it's called strand technology that they developed for the hair was really fantastic. There's a entire plethora of styles. And I think for me, so my character had boxer braids, which are like tight braids that start up here, go down the back.
Mhm.
They did this one small thing that I don't think anybody would notice if you haven't worn those as like a performance hairstyle to keep your hair safe.
Mhm.
You usually have to tie them off down like at the base of your neck to keep them from getting loose or swinging too much.
Mhm.
And they did that. And then the braid
Oh.
continues down further. And so, like, as somebody who does wear that hairstyle and who does braid my hair consistently because of both my culture and the fact that, like, my hair is down to my waist, it is very
Mhm.
long and unruly, that was something that I thought was really special in understanding not just how it looks aesthetically, but how those hairstyles work in practicality. That I thought was a very interesting take on the idea. Um, that I think really works across all of the hairstyles because as hard as it is to do tightly curled hair, it's also extremely hard in game development to do very long hair.
Mhm.
And we get those options here, which I think is phenomenal. I mean, I know people in 14 who use mods just to make their hair longer because from a model perspective, the longer the hair, the harder it is to keep it from clipping through the armor and
Right.
changing through those pieces. And so, like, if you're a woman, you get a bun, a ponytail, or a bob,
Mhm.
usually, or you're bald.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was just a lot more on the spectrum, not just in terms of like texture, but also in terms of like choice of the types of hairstyles you could have, which I thought were good. Um, but I do say, and I've kind of said it everywhere. I've said it in my own preview. I think where the character creator really fails as because the team has been very forward and rightfully so about saying they want everybody to be their own rook. They want everybody to see themselves in their own rook. There are certain limitations that are placed specifically on the female character models and body proportions that I think are really unfair to specifically black and brown women. Our body, like I should be able to make Selma Hayek in a video game. I should
Mm.
be able to
Mhm.
make Megan the Stallion in a video game. Eric, probably too much information, but your girl is rocking triple D's. It should be simple to put into a video game. It's not that hard. I'm
No, it's
athletic. I lift weights. I run. You can do something with them. And like to even look like you have a semblance of a butt, you have to pop that glute slider all the way to 100, pop in the breast slider all the way to 100, takes you from an A to a B cup. And it's this restrictive piece that I do think is a reaction to the over sexualization of those specific parts of women's bodies in games historically. But I also think what it does in doing that is it kind of further maligns that body type as something that is a caricature and not something that is very much associated with Black and brown women. And so I would hope they could maybe do something about that in future patches or even just looking towards the future of the next game that they do. But there just needs to be an understanding that if your inclusiveness is going to be intentional and intersectional, as we can tell, like the skin tone and hair texture is, you also have to take that all the way through. And that doesn't include looking at the way women how our bodies are. Because they worked with the EA teams, EA sports teams. Those
Mhm.
are male characters. And as happy as I am that they addressed hair and skin tone, those are also the two easy wins. Like those are the things that they know will make, like black and brown folks like happy that they're in the game. Give us our body types too. Like you're right there. I believe in you. You could do it. Um,
Yeah.
but I think overall it is a very good character creator. I think it's hard to continually not be able to look like
Yeah,
me in
it
certain
is.
aspects.
I've known people
So,
throughout my life that, they grow up with significant proportions, to put it that
mhm.
way, and, like and it's a thing where, like, constantly like having a large chest is turned into like, it's, oh, it's a caricature, it's a trope or whatever. Like, no, they're just people
Mhm.
that got big boobs. Like, it's just a part of life. And
Exactly.
and I actually like, I know a lot of people who like characters like Isabella from Dragon
Hmm.
Age 2, and like, yes, she walks around, she's got big boobs and a giant butt, and she dresses like the pirate queen, and she rules for that. Like, I think she's a fantastic character for that. And to see the series maybe not tackle that so well now 2 entries later is kind of a bummer. So I totally understand that. I feel like the character creator is something that there's always going to be a way to do better, but that doesn't mean
Yeah,
that we should not point out where it has fallen short, because
exactly.
that's how you get better character creators. Everybody wants better character creators,
Hmm.
more options, more things to do in that. Um,
Yeah. And I would say
whether
like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, whether you're, someone who wants to make yourself, whether you're someone like me who wants to like role play, and I love creating a character and
Hmm.
coming up with an idea of a character and then seeing that come to life in the character creator, or you're like Ken, I look over and you're just making yourself, you're just holding a mirror up and being like, yes, this is me. I've made yet another bald bearded man. Love
I
you,
will say, I
Ken.
feel like I'm somewhere in the middle where it's like I make like like the waist is probably a little smaller than my boxy waist, but like I
No,
do
that
try to make like an idealized version of
the
me.
idealized version is
Um,
very real. That happens. That happens sometimes. I tried to do that in Inquisition, and I just ended up making Macklemore by accident, which was crazy. And then in Baldur's Gate 3, I was like, well, I'm gonna make me, but like, what if I was an elf? And somehow that turned into Elf Anderson Cooper. I'm really not sure how that one happens. Sometimes you get going on those sliders, you just end up somewhere completely different. So that maybe that's why I make like just role play characters now instead of
yeah.
trying to design myself, because I always start somewhere. I'm like, well, but what if I gave him spiky gray hair? And then it just starts going. Um but I do think the character creator, for its faults, for where it does fall short, I do think it is one of the more robust character creators that I have
Hmm.
seen in RPGs, and that is definitely worth noting. That I think, even if you're going to struggle a little bit with Kunari or with representing certain body types, or seeing certain things those way, you're still going to get a lot of options, and a lot of
Yeah.
like the hair tech and stuff is just crazy. It
If
is wild to see in motion.
Eric, if I had not looked over and saw where you were, I would not have stopped creating my
No,
character.
I know.
And
I
then I
had a
was like, oh
moment
no, I need to get going.
I had a moment where I was playing, and I think I had I'd accidentally found a bug. And so I called, it was the only one. It was the only one. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. I did find one, but I was, as far as I know, I was the only one who found it. I'm magic like that. I just do that to video games. I'm sorry. But as I was like, hey, something's up over here, I like looked over and I was like, oh no, Kate's still in that character creator. In about
I
10
was
minutes, I'm gonna have to reach over and be
trying.
like, you gotta play. You gotta play the video, like the other part of the video game. That's also part of the video game. You gotta play all the parts of the video game.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, I will say small thing that I haven't
Mhm.
talked about anywhere else, but I am going to bring it up here because I remembered. It has a double chin slider, which isn't necessarily what you think it
Interesting.
is. Yeah. So what it is I don't I assume it's on the male option as well. So I have been everything from 110 pounds to like what I am now. And no matter how skinny I am, my face is like I got chunky cheeks. I have like that's just my life. But what you can do with it, and what I did with my person, you can actually add like a slight double chin that rounds out the face more, but
Oh,
it gives you like that very specific, like heart-shaped face almost, which is very small. I don't think anybody else cares about that. But
no,
as
it's
somebody
neat
who always
though.
has a chunky face, like I was like, "Ooh, this is cool." Uh, so that is like a nice find that I had.
I'm always
Um,
impressed by the little stuff, like having, whether it's like vitiligo options, or just being
mhm,
able to alter like very specific points of the face, or to add different pigmentations, to do things with the eye.
mhm.
I love doing heterochromia now that I have
Yes.
my astigmatism, because I feel like that's a way for me to represent that in game. It's kind of fun. And it's like, you can do a lot with this and really make a character that is going to feel your own. You know, the back of the box marketing quote is like, no two rooks are ever the same, but like you can really make a rook and then also play with their presets and like you said, do the three face slider to really get into
Hmm.
the zone of like what you want this thing to look
Well,
like.
even the tattoo options, like when you pick a tattoo,
Oh,
you're like picking a
yes. Oh,
tattoo
yeah.
set, and you can pick how light or how dark the tattoo shows up, which allows you
Hmm.
to. I've never seen that before. That was really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So much of that was really interesting. I'm interested to see what the armor and transmog options look like down the line.
yes.
I definitely like this is also going to be a glam game, and you definitely want to glam and look good because there's a photo mode and all that. So, uh, I definitely wanted to explore more of that and just didn't find the time to.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
but overall, like yeah, I just walked away being like, somehow, after 10 years, after all this development, after all this trouble, after all this wondering about what this thing was only always going to be, and I think there is maybe one other thing that I do want to bring up, which is like having Rook as a new character is very Dragon Age, but having Solus being set up for so long and then kind of like put to the side, and he's not
Hmm.
fully out of the picture. You actually get some like Solus lore, which is really interesting and ties back into the story that you're doing. But it does kind of feel weird that we are doing this as not the Inquisitor. And I think that, you know, if you're
Yeah,
looking for that sort of continuation, you might be a little disappointed on that front.
yeah.
Um and so like if you wanted that character to be back at the forefront, to be really in there and to be involved, that is kind of, you know, from what we have seen, it's largely like we are doing a new adventure that has ties to the old adventure, but even like we're not really getting into ideas of, you know, what's been happening in Orlais or Ferelden. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
not really like we're dealing with the gods in the north right now. Like
yeah.
that's the focus. And so I think if you're looking for like some sort of grand overarching advancement in that sense, you're not going to get it. But at the same time, this game also seems like it's going to be peeling back the layers and digging into some stuff that has been like lingering Dragon Age lore questions for a long
Hmm.
time. So in that way, it is super fascinating. So but all this to say, like they did it. Like they made a
Yeah,
new Bioware game that really looks and feels like a new Bioware game and plays like
yeah.
a new Bioware game, and that's really exciting for people who I think have been waiting for this for a decade. I mean, it's been a
Yeah.
long, long time for Dragon Age fans, even for Mass Effect fans. Like depending on
Hmm.
how you felt about Andromeda, it's been a
Give me something
while.
good, please.
Yeah,
I'd
and
like to
like
eat.
and I don't want to like I hate going to a preview and walking out and being like, okay, do I have to do like a quality assessment on this? We saw a
Yeah.
slice that they took out of the game. They're gonna put their best foot forward. They're gonna be really
Yes.
intentional with what they show and how they show it and what they give us and what they don't give us and what context we have and what we don't have. But combined with the number of hours that we gave, which I think is maybe one of the larger preview slices I've done in recent memory for a
Yeah.
game, and also the amount of which we were allowed to explore it and capture from it and dig into it, feeling pretty positive about this game. Like I'm feeling really good. Like, you know, a lot of my worries have kind of been assuaged by this, and that's
Yeah.
that's a good feeling to have as somebody who does love BioWare when they are hitting at their best. So,
Yeah. And I'm the same. Like I think people, if you're if you're a BioWare fan, I think that this is like this is what you've been waiting for. And it feels weird because like I thought that too. I was like, I feel way too high on this. What am I doing?
mhm.
But then I kind of remembered that like I was actually like having seen what I saw, I was kind of down on some aspects and it was able to pull me in and show me that it was actually better when you were playing it in like a very good way. And I think that like I wasn't as excited for this game this year as I was some other titles. And now it's really shot up. Like the
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
we were done, like on the plane home, I just wanted to play more. And I think
yeah.
that that is the hallmark of anything because I have left some preview events where I've just been like, huh.
I got my fill.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I get I know what the game is now, but this one I was thinking about what I was gonna do. I was like, ooh, but like Lucana should be my main romance. I know I want to do a nightmare mode run, like who's that one gonna be? And like,
Hmm.
oh, like this choice I made. And I think that that's what a Bioware game's supposed to be. It's supposed to make you immediately want to start thinking about what you're gonna do next. And I think that that is what I walked away with, and I couldn't have asked for more, actually.
Yeah, yeah, this is like it's what I wanted, and that's like the best praise I can give it. It's not perfect, but I don't think you need to be perfect to be good. And
Hmm.
that's what this really is to me, is like they did this thing, and I think I'm curious to see the final product, to see how it all comes together. But even just from what I played, like I feel like there were a lot of questions around whether this was going to be a Bioware game and what a Bioware game is, and especially with like a lot of new people on the team who are going to be under a lot of
Hmm.
some due and some very undue scrutiny.
Yeah,
Like I think they're putting their money where their mouth is, and like they're
they
showing like,
are.
hey, like we can make a Dragon Age, we can do this, and honestly, that has me even more excited. Not just the idea that like Dragon Age: The Veilguard might come out and be a Bioware game, but that like Bioware is back in the business of making this kind
Yes.
of game, and
No,
that is
that
exciting.
is, yeah, because I'm like, because it's not even just like cool. I'm excited. I think this is going to be a very good game. My brain is the Mass Effect girly is just like, oh my God, is Mass Effect back on the table? And
Yeah.
that
It-
and I know that that's like whatever, but it like I can see a future for a studio that has had to go through so much. And I think that in and of itself in the current landscape of
God, yeah.
studios feels very good.
Yeah. You're always afraid that a game is, it feels like nowadays, especially games are measured by the extremes. You're
Yeah.
either a huge success or a giant flop. There's not really a lot of room in between these days. And so to have
Yeah.
something come out that feels a little bit confident, that feels a bit like it knows what it's doing and what it wants to do, and that it's putting itself forward so confidently, and it's doing that thing that also like the studio is known for, and that doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a complete departure the way that games like Anthem did.
Yeah.
Like if this game was the like multiplayer service game version that was rumored and shuttered ages ago, like that would be
Yeah.
the cause for alarm there. But like to see this just really feel like BioWare, like hell yeah.
It's so like I'm gonna end this here and it's gonna be cheesy. And if we get comments on the video, it'll probably be about this. But a lot of this really does feel like I think when you are so engrossed and in love with games from a specific studio, when you've been away for so long, a lot of it, even if it's not the franchise that you've been invested in, there's a lot of feeling like it's coming back home to something that you've recognized. And that that is probably the best I can do to explain like
Yes.
this game.
Yeah, there's a familiarity there that is just it's a little warm. It is
It
a little
is.
nostalgic. It's a little like,
Exactly.
ah, yes, I'm going back to my home base to talk to my companions and see if they have anything new to share before considering whether I'm setting out on a new adventure. Who will come with me? I am but a lowly rogue. May my warrior and my mage guide me. Please throw your spells out so I can detonate. I cannot detonate until you throw your spells. Please throw your spells. Hold RB to command them to throw their spells. We didn't even talk about that part much, but yeah, like that all works. It's what you expect from that. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it does just feel like I'm playing a Dragon Age again, and that's
Yeah.
great.
Feels very warm and fuzzy in a
Hmm.
good way. So Eric, why don't you tell the people here where they can find you?
Um, if you see me outside, no, you didn't. That's you can find me by day at destructoid.com, where I'll have at least one preview and probably some other breakout quotes from interviews and stuff like that we did at the event. I know there's been some worries, some concerns online about spoilers and stuff like that. I think today here we've been pretty good about not, trust me, not spoiling anything
Yeah.
major. The things we could say. um that's a threat. That's no, seriously. We like I wouldn't want to say anything that I wouldn't want other people to know. So I'm very, as a Dragon Age fan, like I'm aware of that
Yeah.
concern. I know my own coverage will try to avoid that as best as possible, and also like straight up tell you that hearing even about some of the setting stuff, and this is not going to change the goodness of it. But by day over at Destructoid, that's where a lot of my written coverage will be. By night, you can find me at Axe of the Blood God, Normandy FM. That's where a lot of my speaking, thank you, Poe, for punctuating that. A lot of my speaking stuff will be, as well as obviously on here, guesting with Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for showing up. I'm very excited. And you can find me at Uma Myth Randier on all of the socials, and you can find my work at butwhythough.net. You can find our preview, which I did not write, but the wonderful Eddie de Santiago did, down in the comments, and you can find my written preview over at Paste. Yeah. I don't know. Let's go save Theodos and the world and all humankind from elven gods that are also
Let's
just elves,
save
but
the
also
Dragon
devastating.
Age setting.